Well, lovely to be with you. Lovely to have this leisurely time to share with you on the spirituality of my favorite saint. And maybe just before we get into that, just to pose a question to all of us. I know this series that I'm delighted to be a part of is all about saints and scholars. And have you ever wondered why we're attracted to certain saints and not so much to others? You know, our favorite saints are not accidental. I know somebody once said, our favorite saints choose us rather than us choosing our favorite saints. And I think there's an important truth in that. There's something in the attraction that we experience to our favorite saints. The voice of God is in that attraction, I'd want to say. There's something in that chemistry that is really important to attend to. Actually, I would say it was after I wrote my first book on Therese that I suddenly realized why she was my favorite saint. And it was because somehow she exhibits the trait, if you like, that I felt I needed more of in my own relationship with the Lord. So there was something sort of almost instinctive when I read her. It was like feeling that she'd been on a journey that I wanted to go on to, and that maybe she could be a bit of a companion on that journey for me, and an intercessor on that journey. So I guess I just want to put that question out to everybody who's participating this evening. Who are your favorite saints? Have you ever wondered why? And maybe, you know, maybe this presentation might just spark some beginning of an answer to that question. My favorite saint is Therese. I've come to learn because the trademark of her spirituality is trust, and that's something I know that I've needed to build in my own relationship with the Lord, and in my own priesthood, in my own vocation. And somehow I was led to, I'm sure it was the Spirit of the Lord that led me to her, because she'd been on that journey too. So let me share, first of all, her story and the journey that she went on. And then we'll dig down more deeply into her spirituality. Okay, so here we go. I want to basically tell the story. And again, perhaps most of you will be familiar with that story. So, but I don't think we can ever get to the end of retelling stories, because sometimes it just helps us to see links maybe that we didn't see before. So here are her dates, and you can see already that she only lived to the age of 24, but wow, what a 24 years that was. So this is the house in which she was born, in northern France, in Normandy, in Alençon. You can visit this place, her birthplace. Today is a kind of a shrine or a museum, or a bit of both. She was born on the 2nd of January, 1873, and her parents were Zélie. And Zélie, I always think that the trade of both her mother and her father are significant. So Zélie was a lace maker. In fact, in that photo, she's wearing some of the lace that she herself sewed and created. She had a kind of studio, really, making a very renowned form of lace that comes from that part of France. And you can see on that picture how detailed it is. And I suppose the point I wanted to make here simply is that both Zélie's trade and that of her husband Louis, both trades demand an eye for detail. Both are intricate trades in which, you know, in this case, every stitch is significant. And I think this is not, accidental, that somehow, that this was this eye for detail, this valuing of the little stitches, is something that Zélie passed on to her daughter. This is Louis, and his trade was a watchmaker, clockmaker. So again, demanding an eye for the intricate mechanisms that make up a clock. So just to say, I think right away that her parents' jobs were significant in the kind of outlook that they handed on to their youngest daughter. Therese was the youngest. In fact, we just think that they had 9 children. 4 didn't survive childhood. The remaining 5, all girls, and actually all of them entered. Nearly all of them entered actually the same Carmel, but all except Leonie, who's an interesting character, but we don't have time to go into her. But this is the photo of Therese that we have that's of her at the youngest age. She's about 3.5 here in this official kind of photo. She was actually taken to a studio to have this photograph taken. But the thing about this is that it was about this time, when she was about this age, that her mother died of breast cancer. So this was the first big trauma in Therese's life. She was about 3.5, 4 when that happened. She talks about it in her autobiography, but obviously an incredibly important moment in terms of trauma in the upbringing of this child. And it was this a bereavement that necessitated the move, or provoked the move of the Martin family from Alençon to Lisieux. So basically, Therese's dad wanted to be near Therese's uncle. So Zélie's brother worked in Lisieux, and that's what brought them to Lisieux. Zélie's uncle, Isidore, had a pharmacy in Lisieux. So they moved from Alençon to this very beautiful house, Les Buissonnets. As you can see, they were a well-to-do family. In order to be able to own this house. And this is where Therese basically was. She was brought up in this house from the age of 4, and this is where she lived until she entered Carmel. Let me skip to perhaps a really important milestone in Therese's childhood. She's here depicted at about 13 years old, and it was at this age that she experienced what she describes in her autobiography as her Christmas conversion. So this was Christmas 1886, and basically this is where this conversion took place. She comes into Les Buissonnets. They've been to midnight mass. As they enter the house, the fire is roaring. In front of the fire are Therese's shoes that are filled with Christmas presents. And as I say, Therese is the youngest. Now at this stage, there's simply her father, and her next sister up, Celine. So they've just been to, all the rest of the sisters have already left home and entered religious life. But in come these 3 on after having been at Christmas midnight mass. And whatever is wrong with Therese's dad, he lets out a sort of a sigh of exasperation. Basically, when he sees the presents in Therese's shoes, he sort of says something like, "Oh, thank goodness this is the last time we need to do that this year." Basically, Therese, the following Christmas, would be too old for this childish tradition. And Therese overhears this remark, and she goes through that door there you can see on the left and she goes up the stairs to her room to take off her hat and coat. And Celine, her sister, runs up after her, realizing how upset she's going to be by her father's remark. But something happens when she gets to the top of that staircase. She basically takes off her hat and coat, and she turns round, she says in her autobiography, a different person. So instead of bursting into tears, as she would normally have done, she walks down those stairs, she goes back into that, where the fireplace is, and she starts unwrapping her presents. And this is the remarkable thing. She unwraps them for the sake of her father. So it's like she's not unwrapping her presents now as any ordinary child would for the, you know, for the fun of it, for what, you know, what's inside, you know, for herself. She's unwrapping those presents in order to lift her father's mood. Can you imagine at the age of 13 being that mature, I guess, that detached from one's own needs in that moment? Basically, Therese, she says the miracle was that she grew up. She said, I grew up in an instant and was filled with the desire to forget myself and to please others. So this is her Christmas miracle. This is a real turning point in her life. And basically what it leads to is her desire to pray for others and to intercede for them. And this is the first person that she intentionally does that. This is a chap who was guilty, I think, of a triple murder, and he was sentenced to death by the guillotine. And Therese spends a great deal of time basically praying for this guy, Henri Pranzini. And she reads in the newspaper the day after his execution, but just before the guillotine came down, he asked the chaplain that was standing there for his crucifix, and she kissed it 3 times. She kissed the wounds on that crucifix 3 times. And for her, Therese, that was a sign that, as it were, this guy had repented at the last moment. And she kind of felt, well, if I can do that for Pranzini, I can do that for souls for the rest of my life. And that was basically the spur for her to seek to begin a Carmelite vocation. And obviously she was too young at this point, but that she wasn't deterred by that. She asked first of all the Mother Superior of the Carmel. She refused point blank. Likewise, the chaplain at the Carmel, he said, no, you're far too young. Her uncle Isidore said, no way, I'm not giving my permission for that. Obviously, Isidore representing, as it were, the mother side of the family. Her father did give his permission, and well, I mean, that in itself must have been such a generous thing to do. The last of his daughters, all giving them all to the religious life. So where did she go next? She went to the bishop. This is the photograph of her all dolled up to see the bishop, the local bishop of Bayeux, asking his permission. She made herself look a little bit older than she actually was, hoping that might make a difference. It didn't. She didn't. She basically, the reply she got from him was, take heed of what my chaplain in the Carmel in Lisieux says. And so basically it was that was a refusal. She didn't give up. She went to Rome on pilgrimage with her father and again with Celine. And she saw, she had an audience with the Pope, which was Leo XIII at the time. And she tells this story that basically she'd been told not to speak unless spoken to, but she disobeyed all the usual etiquette. She broke through the cordon of the Swiss guards. She went up to the Pope. She says she grabbed him by his knees and put her little face in front of his in such a way that she could actually see her own reflection in his eyes. And she asked his permission to enter. Again, she didn't get the answer that she wanted. I think Leo said to her something like, "You will enter if God wills." She didn't like the reply, but in fact, God did will it. And the following Easter, I think, about 6 months after that visit, she was in Carmel, amazingly, at the age of 15 and a half. 15 and a half, she entered. So just in terms of the determination and the not taking no for an answer, I think she can be a wonderful example to us in that regard. Here's a picture of the very, as you can see, very kind of forbidding kind of place, austere kind of setup. Here's the Lisieux Carmel, home to about 26 at that time sisters, and basically in terms of the horarium, they were up at 4:45. There was 7 hours of prayer, 4 hours of manual work. There was a meager vegetarian diet, no electricity or heating, except for this one room where they were allowed to go for 2 hours each day for recreation, which was essentially, they were allowed to speak during that time and to talk to each other and to warm themselves by the fire. But very austere life. This is her cell. So we're talking about a room of about 3 meters square, and just a simple bed and desk. So this was the life she committed herself to from then on at the age of 15 and a half. Here's her dressed in her novice habit. At the age of, probably in this photo, she's about, I'd say about 16 or so in this photo. And just what a lovely cheeky look she has. And the wonderful thing, or one of the wonderful things, is she never really left that novitiate, because when she, as it were, completed her own novitiate and took her vows, she was then appointed by the Mother Prioress as the novice mistress, amazingly. So she spent her entire life, you could say, well, in the novitiate, in, learning, and that's, I'm sure, what she loved. She always wanted to see herself as a learner, as a disciple, as a little one. Here's her actually with one of her novices, one of her favorite novices, Sister Mary of the Trinity. And it was actually providential that she became novice mistress, because that's the way she began to formulate her spirituality. Obviously, those of you who are teachers will know the best way of teaching anything is to hand it on to others, or rather the best way of getting hold of something ourselves is to teach it to others, to hand it on to others. Somehow that helps us formulate it and get it in some kind of order in our own heads and hearts. And this is what happened. I'm sure this is how Therese begins to formulate what she then begins to call her little way, because she had to teach it to others. Speeding on to towards the end of her life, and we'll just wrap up her story, but the last 18 months of her life, really, really significant. She basically contracts TB. So one of the biggest, perhaps the biggest killer in Europe at that time. And here's a photograph showing the way that TB was treated in those days. You know, in terms of, she was wheeled out of the infirmary to get fresh air. This was the way that sanatoriums were operating at that time. But the important thing for us to realize is that that last 18 months of her life weren't simply filled with physical suffering, but spiritual suffering too. So the last 18 months of her life, she describes as like going through a dark tunnel. So basically, the lights went out in terms of her faith. So she experienced, I think what we'd say is that she experienced what St. John of the Cross describes in his dark night. In fact, I would say that if we want to understand what John of the Cross is talking about, go to Therese, read what she experienced, especially during the last 18 months of her life. I think you could say that she is an epitome, an example, or a parable of what John's doctrine is all about. And so, although you wouldn't guess it really from her, for example, from her poetry and from her retreat notes at that time, she's. I mean, those writings, I think, are amongst the most beautiful of Therese's. But in fact, she's getting no feelings from her faith, no consolation from her faith during that last 18 months. And I mean, basically, she's going through her own Paschal mystery during that last 18 months. She speaks of it as like an iron curtain going down between heaven and earth. She talks about it as a night of nothingness. She speaks very powerfully of this. And I think this is what lends her spirituality such credibility. You know, that here she is, she's only, 23, 24 years old. But she experiences not just physical suffering, but spiritual torment. And somehow this lends her teaching an authority, I think, which speaks to those who are called to go through the dark night too. So she dies, and actually, one of the things that we've got are her last conversations, and very beautiful and yet very harrowing they are. She goes through a real sort of roller coaster of fear and trust, and one gets a sense that through those weeks and months, her trust is purifying. And so she dies on the 30th of September 1897, and here she is in death, and obviously that's why we are keeping her feast next Thursday, isn't it? The 1st of October, which is the day after her death, and so it's her, as it were, her birthday into glory. But why do we know so much about her? I mean, this is the mysterious thing too, is we wouldn't have known her had it not been for the fact that a year after her death, the Mother Prioress chose to publish her autobiography. Well, I say autobiography, in fact, that prioress had asked Therese to write down, first of all, her childhood memories. And this Therese did out of obedience, not thinking that they would one day be published. But what we have in the Story of a Soul is basically 3 manuscripts. Those memories, those childhood memories, her last retreat notes, the notes she made during her last retreat. So that was during that last 18 months. In fact, it was exactly a year before she died. She made that retreat. And then the final part of the autobiography is her her recollections of community living, and that last part is so full of anecdotes and so on. I'll read at least one of them for you a little bit later. But basically, in it, we see her struggling in community, learning how to love. Basically, is what she's writing about in that last part of this precious manuscript, which was, as I say, published exactly a year after she died, and it basically took the world by storm. And that's how she came to be canonized so quickly, because this book got translated into so many languages. It was read even by the soldiers, or at least a summary of it was read even by the soldiers in the trenches during the First World War. And this is basically how she came to be a household name, and how she, as it were, shot to heavenly fame, as it were. So there's an outline of her life. And what I wanted to do was to drill down into some aspects of her spirituality, and I've just chosen 4, and I've chosen them for the sake really of memory, because I want to just kind of do a little. Well, a thing that I hope you'll find useful in terms of remembering these elements, these principal elements of her little way. But just before we do that, just to focus on that word "little," we've already seen, you know, from her mum and dad, this eye for detail, this recognition of the significance of littleness. I just want to maybe make our way into her teaching and her spirituality, her particular way of viewing Christian discipleship, but just by underlining this. Maybe I can do this by well, first of all, just a couple of stories. So here's a you'll recognize perhaps the church into the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem, the door of which is too small, basically, for most people. I mean, the reason it's like this is basically to stop the soldiers coming in on horseback in the medieval times. But I think there's something beautiful about the fact that the Church of the Nativity you can only get into by making yourself small. The only people that can get into that church with no problem are children. And that gives us an image of Therese's spirituality in terms of she, well, the way she would say it would be, I want to stay little and to become this more and more. Because she realized that littleness gives us access to the things of God. That somehow, you know, when we're too big, we get stuck. We just can't get into it. So here's a little story from her childhood that she tells. She was, and I think this was way back in Alençon times. They wanted to play in a neighbor's garden, but blocking the entrance to this garden was a horse. So all the sisters there, who start talking to each other and wondering with each other, how are we going to get the horse to get out of the way so we can get into the garden? And while they're discussing, you know, various strategies, Therese has slipped underneath the horse's legs, basically slipped between the horse's legs, and she's already in the garden. I think it gives us a beautiful insight into the way, well, she says to one of her novices once, she says, and this novice is trying to get over a particular problem, trying to surmount this problem that she has. And Therese's advice is, why are you trying to surmount it? Why are you trying to get over it? Why don't you try to go under it? So it's a kind of counterintuitive thing, but there's something there, I think, that is really important. Another little vignette maybe to illustrate this from that pilgrimage to Rome that Therese made with her father and with Celine. And she talks about being in the Colosseum, and they weren't actually allowed to go down into the arena because it was cordoned off. The pilgrims weren't allowed to actually go there. But Therese and Celine find a little gap in the fence that is just big enough for them to slip through. And so they both, breaking all the rules, get through that gap and are able to get down into the arena. So just a little kind of way that gives us a sense of her discipleship exploiting littleness. Okay. So here's the bit of fun that I want to have with you in terms of trying to remember some of the key aspects of her spirituality. This is the constellation Orion. I'm sure you can recognize there the 3 stars that are that make up Orion's belt, and it's one of the most visible constellations in the sky. And if you just go down there below the belt, there's a kind of a smudge there that's a bit of a different color. So this is actually not a star, but a nebula. And essentially, when you look up at that constellation from now on, I want you to remember this story that Therese speaks about in her autobiography. She's talking about coming home from visiting one Sunday, visiting her uncle. So she's obviously now they've moved to Lisieux, and she's walking home with her dad after having visited her uncle. And this is what she says: "When we were on the way home, I would gaze upon the stars that were twinkling ever so peacefully in the skies, and the sight carried me away. There was especially one cluster of golden pearls that attracted my attention and gave me great joy, because they were in the form of a T. I pointed them out to Papa and told him my name was written in heaven." How precocious is that? But here's the thing. So she basically sees that constellation and she sees her own name, as it were, written in heaven. But what I want to use that for is to give us the first letter of 4 of the main facets, aspects, dimensions of Therese's view of Christian discipleship. And the first and the most important is trust, that I've already mentioned to you. Trust is the trademark of Therese's spirituality. And it's one of the things that comes across again and again and again. So here's a few quotes for you. Trust triggers miracles. And if you think about it, trust is what triggered the miracle of miracles. The resurrection. When Therese sees Jesus on the cross, in fact, very often when I look at a cross, I see the letter T, and I see the first letter in the word trust. And so, the best evidence of trust, the body language of trust, is written there on the cross. And it's that trust that triggers the miracle of miracles, which is the resurrection. My way is all trust and love. By the way, if any of you are conversant with French, the word that translate with trust is confiance. So you can hear the word confidence. So in some translations, it's my way is all confidence and love. But I prefer the word trust because it has more of a personal warmth about it, conveys something about the key characteristics of Therese's relationship with the Lord. And I would say what she's talking about there, when she says trust and love, I think she's talking about what Paul calls faith, hope, and love. I would say that she what she means by trust is a combination of faith and hope. But this combination is something she comes out with again and again. So this is the last line of her autobiography. I go to him by trust and love. In fact, literally, that line is, I lift myself to him by trust and love. So I like to think of trust and love as the two wings, as it were, of her little way, the two wings on which she makes her journey to the Lord and invites us to do the same. But here's another quote that combines both trust and nothing but trust must lead us to love. So trust is that first T, and the second one I want to focus on perhaps a little bit more on is truth. Therese was passionate about truth. In fact, let me tell you a story. I remember taking this photograph into a primary school once. So it was the whole school. So it was like rising fives to 11-year-olds. And so basically I took, on the Feast of St. Therese, I took this photograph of her into the school. And I said, here's the photograph of somebody you don't know, or probably you don't know, but tell me something about her just from looking at her face, just from looking at her photograph. And basically the forest of hands went up, and the first three answers that the children gave, the first one was, she looks as though she would never tell a lie. The second was, she looks stubborn. And then the third one was, she looks cheeky. I thought, wow, spot on. All three enabled me basically to talk about Therese and those characteristics of her. But wasn't that interesting? The first one was, she said, she looks as though she could never tell a lie. And yeah, there are just so many instances of that. I think of her childhood. There's one place where she says how, as a very tiny child, she started to pull the wallpaper off the wall, and when she'd done it, she couldn't help but admit it to her parents. She said, "Do you want to know who pulled the wallpaper off the wall? It was me. It was me." So there was something about something that she found, appealing in honesty right from her earliest days. I just zoom in on her eye here, because one of the prayers that she loved to pray was, "Make me see things as they really are. Let nothing throw dust into my eyes." What a wonderful prayer that is. She didn't want to be deceived. She didn't want to, for her sight to be distorted by by her own stuff, her own weaknesses or wants or whatever. Just, Lord, make me see things as they really are. If the truth hurts sometimes, well, let it hurt, but let that truth do its liberating work, as it were. A couple more quotes. "I can nourish myself on nothing but the truth. I have a horror of pretense." And one of the ironies about Therese is, I think she's been dealt a pretty bad deal in the way sometimes that she's been portrayed, not least by her own sister. So the next sister up, Celine, was a bit of an artist, and this is the way that Celine depicted her sister. And I think to myself, but that's nothing like her. You know, it's nothing like her photograph. And so sadly, I mean, obviously she wasn't doing that intentionally. And also, I might say that the sister who had that her autobiography published doctored it. You know, again, she wasn't doing that in it for any kind of malicious reason, but she took things out of it that she thought might, you know, scandalize people, and she put other things into it that she thought might help people. But that first manuscript that was published was edited, you know, you might even say censored, really, by another of her sisters. So she's not, you know, I mean, that thankfully now we have the unedited versions that are available since the 40s and the 50s, the translations that since have been based upon the original manuscripts. But in a sense, Therese, you know, ironically fell victim to that pretense, which was such a horror to her. Let me tell you a story just to illustrate her love for the truth. And this is about the sister who's in the bottom left-hand corner of this photograph, who was Sister Martha, who actually started in the novitiate with Therese. So they started out together, although Martha was actually a little bit older than Therese. And initially they were the best of friends, but something happened which meant that Therese needed to say something that was not going to be easy to say to this Martha. Basically, what happened was this Martha, Therese could see, was getting far too emotionally attached to the mother prioress. And she was becoming kind of, you might say, somehow dependent on her, you know, rushing to see her at every opportunity and so on. And so basically Therese felt that their friendship couldn't continue unless she actually say something and challenge Martha about this. So let me just read this part, which is so revealing. And so she says, God made me feel that the moment had come and I must no longer fear to speak out, or else I'd end these conversations which resemble those of two friends. And so she says, the hour we decided on for coming together for this truth speaking arrived. The poor little sister, casting a look at me, saw immediately that I was no longer the same. She sat down beside me, blushing, and I, placing her head upon my heart, told her with tears in my voice everything I was thinking about her. But I did this with such tender expressions and showed her such great affection that very soon her tears were mingled with mine. She acknowledged with great humility that what I was saying was true, and she promised to commence a new life, asking me as a favor always to let her know her faults. Isn't that beautiful? To have a friend like that who won't let us away with stuff, you know, who honors us with such honesty. And I love the bit where she mentions about humility. Because this is, I think it was Therese of Lisieux who said, humility is truth. Humility is standing in the truth, no matter how painful that might be sometimes, about ourselves, about life. So to have truth speakers in our lives, like Therese. So truth as a really important dimension of her spirituality. Third one, so two more. Third one, and this is one I think I would say has been one of the most important influences personally upon me, having Therese as a friend, as it was, and a companion in discipleship. Thanksgiving, gratitude. Here's my favorite quote from her on this. The spirit of gratitude draws down upon us the overflow of God's grace. No sooner have we thanked him for one blessing than he speedily sends us 10 additional blessings. She goes on, when we thank him for these, he multiplies blessings to such a degree that we seem to be under a constant stream of divine graces, all coming our way. And then she says, as if knowing what we're thinking, I've experienced it. You try it and you'll see. This is something, which makes Therese such a distinctive doctor of the churches, as we now call her. That means to say a teacher, a universal teacher, because she's speaking from experience. This is not some head thing, intellectual thing. She's speaking out of her own experience, and that experience told her that gratitude is one of the ways we open ourselves wide open to God's grace. In fact, there it is in the word gratitude, isn't it? Gratia, that first bit of that word, tells us that basically, if we are grateful, our lives will be graceful. But there's that intimate of a connection between those two. Can I do a quick diversion here to another favorite, you might say, saint in inverted commas of mine, G.K. Chesterton. Actually, Therese and Chesterton were contemporaries. He was born just a year after her. But here, he says something I'm sure she would have just wholeheartedly agreed with. You say grace before meals, all right, but I say grace before the concert, and grace before the play, and grace before I open a book, and grace before painting, swimming, playing, walking, and grace before I pick up my pen. In other words, grace before everything, because, as Therese would say, everything is grace. Everything is a grace. So the best way we can open our hearts to the next grace God has in store for us is to thank him for the ones we've already received. Here's her handwriting actually here. Interestingly, somebody did a bit of a, what do you call these people? Graphologists. So they did a kind of report on her handwriting, and they found a child's fears and a warrior's resolve. Isn't that beautiful? How you get that from handwriting, I have no idea. But what an interesting combination. A child's fears and a warrior's resolve. So there's something about her handwriting that reveals the struggle she herself was on. So that trust that's her trademark didn't come naturally. As a child, it came through her fears. And was all the more precious and all the more credible and all the more authoritative because of that. Here she's just describing prayer. For me, prayer is a cry of gratitude. In fact, the complete sentence there is, it's a cry of gratitude in the midst of trial as well as joy. So not to be grateful simply for God's blessings, but to raise our voices in gratitude even when things are not going right for us. What do we say in the Eucharist? To give God thanks and praise always and everywhere. Of course, imitating the Lord at the Last Supper, who staring death in the face, is able to take bread and give God thanks and praise. So, thanking Him in the, as it were, in the teeth of the evidence is a way. I guess it's one of the most beautiful ways we can demonstrate our trust. To thank Him ahead of the fact, to thank Him already for something we haven't yet received. but our thanking him for it is a way of demonstrating, our expressing so eloquently our trust that he will give it. So thanks. And the last one that I've chosen is today. This sense of what famous Jesuit, French Jesuit Jean-Pierre de Caussade would call the sacrament of the present moment. Abandoning, again, another title for that book, Abandonment to Divine Providence. Abandonment actually is a part of a very important part of Therese's vocabulary. Abandoning ourselves, surrendering ourselves to the providence of God that comes to meet us in the present moment. Let me just tell you a story from my last parish. I used to go walking up a disused railway line, and I remember one time walking towards me was a young family, mum, dad, and a young girl, perhaps a little bit younger than Therese in this photo. She's probably about 8 in this photograph, but so this little girl I came across, she's probably maybe more like 5 or 6, I'm not sure, but anyway, this little girl was skipping in a little way in front of her parents coming towards me, so I thought, well, I'd step out of the way and let her skip past me. But in fact, what she did was to skip right up to me. And she looked at me in a very kind of disarming way. And she said to me, "You don't know who I am, do you?" As if I should know her, you know. And I said, "No, I'm afraid I don't." And she said, she looked at me as if I was stupid, and she said, as if it was obvious, "I'm a princess," you know. And she put me in mind of Therese, you know, that precociousness, but that immediacy that children have, that living in the present moment. You know, she wasn't fretting about the future or paralyzed by the past. She was right here, right now, as we say, and making that connection with me. She was living as children so often do more easily than the rest of us, living for now. In fact, you could say that for little children, now is the only moment they know. It's the only world they know. And Therese is one of those little children that reintroduces us into that beautiful relationship with the present moment, where we encounter the Lord. Does that sound coming through? Great.
Oh, how I love thee, Jesus. My soul aspires to thee.
I was just sorry. I'm just gonna rush through these. That song might come on again. If it does, I'll let it play a little bit further. In fact, it's a poem. It's a setting of a poem by Therese. It's called "My Song of Today." So the refrain is, "Today, dear Lord, today." I won't explain why you didn't hear the whole of that song. We had some technical problems just before we started, so I apologize for that. It might just come on again. Let's just see. There we are. We'll listen to at least a verse of it anyway.
Oh, how I love thee, Jesus. My soul aspires to thee, and yet for one day only This simple prayer I pray, come reign within my heart, smile tenderly on me. Today, dear Lord, today, today, dear Lord, today.
Okay, so I'm going to speed these on. These are just some quotes that that actually were meant to accompany that song. So if it starts again, I do apologize. But these are some of the words that just communicate that living in the present moment that Therese symbolizes so beautifully. What I'm going to do is try to come out of that screen share now, just for a moment, and just whiz on to the last bit of music that I just had for you before we have some Q&A. Let's just see if we can do that. Just to sum up really what we've been exploring.